This is the way it feels to move through summer in Lululemon. Iconic Align softness without the front seam. For our smoothest look and feel ever, summer won't know what hit it. Stretch your limits in the non-stop flexibility of the new Lululemon Align No-Line Pant in select stores and at Lululemon.com.
Savor every last drop of summer with Starbucks. From bold refreshers to rich cold brews, the sunniest season only gets better with a handcrafted iced beverage in your hand. Available for a limited time. Your summer favorites are ready at Starbucks.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 547, Soviet Whack-A-Mole. Last time, having waited until the panzers around Prokhorovka were stuck in and the northern pincer was more than stalled, the Stavka launched its counterattack, or rather, two counterattacks. The northern attack, Operation Kutuzov, was to trap Modul's Ninth Army, but as we saw, it mostly got away, and the second offensive around the Donbass region, south of Kursk, was also to drive back the invaders. The question before the Germans now was how to respond in such a way as to counter the Soviets' counterattack. And then there was the situation in the West. The Western Allies now controlled Sicily, or soon would, leaving them free to then move on again. But where would that hammer fall? Berlin, and more importantly Rome, would just have to wait to find out. But back to Prokhorovka. Soon after the war, that particular battle, as impressive and as horrible as it was, had grown in mythic proportions. The number of tanks have been disputed, used to justify a number of points of view, but in the end, Prokhorovka was where the 5th Guards Tank Army stopped the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, period. And according to the 5th Guards Tank Army commander Romitstrov, who would stay in the fighting here, the Germans, he noticed, were a bit more hesitant, cautious in their fighting now. Either way, the Germans now had a new reality to deal with. While the Soviets had lost 1,500 vehicles from their Central and Verona fronts by this point, their field repair crews were working miracles. By August 3rd, while Modul's 9th was retreating out of the Orel salient, the Russians now had 2,750 vehicles, all kinds, in the Kursk sector alone. Of course, Zhukov had to look for replacement tank crews, but that was a good problem to have. Comparatively, the 4th Panzer's army attack just to get close to Obayan and Prokhorovka had cost them 330 tanks and assault guns. The 3rd Panzer Division was now down to 30 vehicles, and by the end of July, Germany's lost tanks stood at 645 and 207 assault guns, just at a time when they were forced to go on the defensive. But the one and last statistic to dominate the Eastern Front was this. Berlin had a goal of building 1,000 tanks a month by 1943, and that had yet to be achieved, while the Soviets were getting close to 2,500 a month, which they would reach in 1944. So this alone allowed the Russians to take heavy tank losses, and they would, for the foreseeable future, and still retain the initiative. No amount of brilliant panzer tactics would change that. Oh, I'm sorry, one more fact. By August of 1943, the Stavka had 6.5 million men in uniform and another 500,000 in reserves, while the number of German troops was falling. In July and August, Army Group South had suffered 133,000 casualties alone. Their replacements totaled 33,000 men. Again, the initiative belonged to the Soviets, but on their side, Stalin had reverted back to his old ways. As for when they should switch from defending to attacking during Citadel, Stalin had given that decision to the Stavka, which made sense. But as an untrusting man, so hence he liked to control things, by July 15th, he was urging the Stavka to go over to a general offensive. And this just after the losses of defending against Citadel while the Donbass offensive and the Orel attack was still ongoing. Zhukov had to pull out all the stops to counter this. His most effective argument was that a period of resupplying and preparation in order for an attack to have more success was, to Stalin's credit, listened to. Yes, Stalin wanted the enemy gone from his country. Yes, he wanted Kiev back ASAP. But the enemy could still deliver tens of thousands of deaths to Russian soldiers. So best beware. To Zhukov's thinking, like Churchill in the West, Russia was still in the let's wear them down a bit more phase. And Stalin agreed, for now. To the south of Citadel, the Donbass offensive, or the Mayas Donets offensive, as we saw last time, had been launched. The idea here was to not only test and check the enemy along the Mayas River that runs into the Sea of Azov, but also the Donets, which turns to the northwest until almost reaching Kharkov. That city was to be retaken as well with the soon-launched Operation Muniantsev. But the operation here, now, in the south, was to tie down any enemy reserves that might be sent north to help with still trying to take Obayan or defend against the Orel offensive, or vice versa. The Soviets had the numbers, if not the tactical skills for anything too complicated. Might as well use them. Just below Kharkov, Lieutenant General Malinovsky's southwestern front would attack the 40th Tank Corps of the 1st Panzer Army with 202,000 men and just over 1,000 tanks and assault guns. Meanwhile, below this, Colonel General Tobolkin's southern front would attack across the Mius River just above the Sea of Azov with 271,000 men and 737 tanks and assault guns. Both attacks would have their own air army. The Soviet attacks started out on July 17th, just 2 days before Hitler and the shaken Mussolini met. The Germans had noticed the Soviet buildup, so on July 14th, Hitler ordered the 24th Panzer Corps from reserve to join the 1st Panzer Army. When the southwestern units attacked that July 17th, the men of the 1st and 8th Guards Army managed to cross the Seversky Donets River, about halfway between the Sea of Azov and Kharkov. They established a few bridgeheads and then moved on another 5 kilometers, but all the while taking heavy casualties. But then they ran into another defensive line. The area in general was too compact for the Soviet tanks to operate freely in, and that, combined with counterattacks, first by the reserves of the 1st Panzer Army, and then those of the recently arrived 24th Panzer Corps, checked the Soviet offensive here. To the immediate left of this Soviet penetration, the Soviet 3rd Guards Army attacked as well, but unsupported, though it did have air coverage, but it was quickly stalled. Back to the penetration of the 1st and 8th Guards Army, the German counterattacks did not push the enemy back across the river, but it also meant that a Soviet breakthrough here was not going to happen. So, both sides settled for bleeding each other. As for the Mayos River offensive further south, that was more successful, until it wasn't. The 51st, 2nd Guards, 28th, and 44th Armies crossed the Mius and soon had a penetration of 15 kilometers deep and 20 kilometers wide. Despite everything else going on, obviously this got the attention of the German High Command. So 5 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions were put together, including men and panzers from the Dasreich and Totenkopf. But it would take time for them to get into position. Fortunately, the Soviets exhausted themselves with their attacks, and they were soon checked from further success, which is when another mutual bloodletting began here in earnest. The Soviets suffered almost 100,000 casualties here, the Germans just over 21,000. And when the SS counterattack did get started that July 30th, it was simply too much for the tired Russians. They were pushed back, and by August 2nd, the Soviets were recrossing the Mius River, with the Germans on their tail. This short-lived offensive failed as for retaking Soviet territory, but it did tie down troops and pulled from the exhausted SS men, still recovering from their defeat at Prokhorovka. Having said that, Operation Rumyantsev, the Soviet attack to retake Kharkov, was launched on August 3rd, just one day after the Germans had pushed the Soviets back across the Mius River. Obviously, the Germans in the south were too tired to help out with this latest battle, which would explain why this attack was over in under 3 weeks. Vatutin's Voronezh front got the rest it needed thanks to Zhukov's intervention and was joined by the Steppe front to attack the northern section of Army Group South. This had the Russians going up against the 4th Panzer Army, Detachment Kempf, now Army Group Kempf, and the newly reformed 6th Army under General Hollet. The Soviets came with 1.1 million men, 2,418 tanks, and almost 14,000 guns and rocket launchers. The Germans who were defending Kharkov had 200,000 men and 237 tanks and assault guns. The reason for these comparatively low numbers was that during the just completed defense of the Mius River, Manstein had to pull the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, 24th Corps, and the 48th Panzer Corps south to help there. His job was quickly becoming one of a very frustrating Soviet whack-a-mole. The Soviet men and tanks attacking the Kharkov area now were the ones that had helped defend during Citadel. But again, thanks to Zhukov, they had time to rest and resupply. After a heavy artillery barrage on the morning of August 3rd, 2 Soviet tank armies moved out. And the Germans fought well enough, but numbers tell. And 2 days later, August 5th, Belgorod, about 15 miles north-northeast of Kharkov, was liberated. And since the Soviets were coming from the north and east, the Germans simply did not have enough men to stop either attack. Thus, the northern attack was able to push on another 60 kilometers, or 37 miles, past Belgorod to the southwest. By the time the SS divisions were moved up back north, after fighting in the south, the Soviet penetration had reached Bogodukov, 30 kilometers or 18 miles northwest of Kharkov, and about 50 kilometers or 31 miles southwest of the just retaken Belgorod. To their credit, the SS Panzer divisions cut deep into the Soviet tanks, even when the 5th Guards Tank Army joined in. In fact, by the time the fighting was over here, the Russians would lose 800 of their 1,112 tanks. Point is, the German counterattack, though starting well, was quickly over, at least here. Another German push was made in between Bogodukov and Kharkov, which trapped some of the leading Soviet units, but there were more men trapped than those who were trapping them. The Soviets got out of this, but again, suffered for their success. Still, this tied down the German panzers to the west of Kharkov, allowing the more numerous Russian forces to focus on that city coming from the east. Kharkov was taken, for the last time, on August 23rd. Again, though the victory was Soviet, they suffered more casualties, of about 50,000 here, while the Germans only suffered 9,000. Though Belgorod and Kharkov had been taken from them, the panzers had been able to stop an offensive that might have grown into a general offensive, like Stalin wanted. But what was about to take place was a series of Soviet offensives, basically wherever an opportunity presented itself. For example, another one was about to be launched, again along the Mius River, before August was even out. But this one would be far more successful than the last. But shifting back to the west, Mussolini's seat of power had been shaken by the Western Allies landing on Sicily, and Hitler was right to be concerned. But it wouldn't be the GIs, the British, Canadian, Free French, nor Australian troops that removed Il Duce from his lofty perch. That could only come from a higher power. But no, not God. As mentioned last time, on July 9th, Operation Husky, the landing of Allied troops on Sicily, got underway. And on July 19th, Mussolini and Hitler met in northern Italy, the latter to assure the former that German assistance was on the way, which was not good enough for other powerful Italians, like former Foreign Minister Ciano, Il Duce's son-in-law and now Italy's ambassador to the Holy See, nor to Dino Grandi, the first Count di Mordano, who was the current foreign minister and a stalwart fascist, and the Minister of Justice. Mussolini knew he was in trouble, so he called the Grand Council together on July 24th. This was the first time they had met since the war started. Mussolini started out by saying the Germans may pull out of the south. To wit, Grandi tore into Il Duce, listing all of the Italian lives and the territory lost, the bombings, the deprivations, and then ended with calling for a vote of no confidence in Mussolini. It passed 19-8, which was not the end of the Italian fascist leader. No, only King Victor Emmanuel III could do that. But this vote authorized the king to do just that. So the next day, and please forgive me, not unlike a certain short, balding, bespectacled man in New York whose best friend is a comedian named Jerry, Mussolini went to work the next day like nothing had happened. Indeed, Mussolini believed that the Grand Council was only an advisory body with no actual power. But it's worth remembering that Mussolini had been in power since 1922. But meanwhile, plans were made. So at 5 p.m. the day after the Grand Council meeting, Mussolini was summoned to the palace. As he went in, the building was quickly surrounded by 200 troops. When Il Duce and the king were face to face, Mussolini started informing Victor Emmanuel of yesterday's proceedings, as if the man would not know of it. The king quickly silenced him and then announced that he, Mussolini, was being dismissed from office, but with immunity. Stunned, Mussolini was taken away by the soldiers, but was told it was for his own safety. Put into a Red Cross ambulance car, the former fascist leader, who had been spoken of so highly by the British and Americans, who had been on the cover of Time magazine as a man of action, was now out of power. Again, for now. When news of this was announced on the Italian radio, the people cheered, and some wept as they believed it also meant the war was over for Italy. But the Germans and the Western Allies had different ideas about that. Postscript. Proving once again that even grown men in uniform are not immune to wishful thinking, enough of the German general staff, including Hitler, had deluded themselves through desperation that Citadel would work, even though the enemy had superior numbers in all categories and respectable enough equipment. And even then, had the pincers met, there were insufficient reserves to exploit such a local victory. But propping up Citadel, for those who believed in it, or rather hoped, was the idea that the Russian peasant soldiers would panic at the first shot. But there is no excuse for that kind of thinking, not in mid-1943. But, as we all know, dealing in reality is harder than it appears. We've all been there. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So we are almost at the end of where I'm going to stop. I just want to clear up a couple more things. There's a certain defensive line the Germans are going to build up. I want to get them to that and then stop from there, and then we'll switch to North Africa. Anyway, so as far as the latest members, or I guess I should say member, I would like to welcome aboard Jason Laflamme. I don't know. I think it's French. I don't know. Jason, you can let me know. He is from Florida. I appreciate it very very much. I do not have any donations this time, but hey, que sera, sera. So yeah, we're getting close to the end of our time for now on the Eastern Front. We'll cover North America. We'll bring it up to probably where at this point is at where Mussolini loses his job, and then jump back to the Pacific and pick up with the Battle of the Coral Sea, Midway, and Guadalcanal that comes after that, and we'll just kind of move everything along. So I hope you enjoyed or are enjoying our time on the Eastern Front, and it really was neat. And I mean that in a very weird way, of seeing how the Eastern Front changed. It was a very gradual thing. There was a lot of suffering. It's a good thing that the Russian state was so populous because, I mean, they're being treated like cannon fodder, but when you're up against a superior foe, in a way, that's kind of what you have to do. So, and it helps that Stalin doesn't care, right? Let's be honest. Anyway, so the alteration, the metamorphosis, whatever term you want to use, of how professional and even better still that the Soviet fighting forces are going to get is just truly staggering. But again, necessity is the mother of invention. Needs must. Stick in whatever phrase you want. Anyway, so I'll see you soon with the next one, and then we'll bring in the GIs. To North Africa. Take care, everyone.
Incoming transmission.
Hello, and welcome to History Dispatches.
We are the father-son duo bringing you the weird, the wild, the wacky, and the craziest tales from across time.
From the Ice Bowl
to the Great Heathen Army.
And the head of Oliver Cromwell.
The same head they kept on a pike for 3 years?
Yep, all here on History Dispatches.
New episodes every weekday.
Find out more at historydispatches.com or wherever you get your podcast app.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.